So we'll launch into the next segment here, which is a panel. And let me introduce the speakers briefly, starting with our guest, Rakesh, who's been a friend of ours for a long time. And I'm just going to read from the bio side on this, any of the important points. So Rakesh is the managing principal with Trescent. He leads Trescent's European and American operations, and he advises companies on global enterprise-wide corporate real estate and facilities management deals. And he's a pioneer in innovative approaches, particularly with respect to pricing and supplier innovation generally. So thanks very much, Rakesh, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Then we have Kevin. So a lot of you probably know Kevin is a partner in our practice here in Chicago, and he concentrates on outsourcing and information technology transactions, but he also does a lot of facilities management and transactional real estate deals as well. And Mark, from our London office, Mark is the head of our intellectual property and IT group. And Mark wears many hats. Of course, he does these transactions, but he is also actively involved in facilities management and transactional real estate deals as well. And so today, we'll share some of the expertise with you in PropTech. And if you have any questions or comments as we go through this, please feel free to chime in. We'd love to hear from you. So, as we get started, could each of you please define PropTech? It seems like a term that we all hear, and different people have different interpretations of it. So, Rakesh, maybe you could start us off with defining PropTech generally, or what you mean when you say PropTech.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm not sure there's an industry definition, and I certainly don't have a definition per se. I can tell you what it means to me. And to me, PropTech means the application of technology in the property management real estate area that's creating opportunities for companies and investors and suppliers alike. So the best example would be WeWork, a very traditional real estate company that through its application and positioning of technology is reclassified as a technology company and is achieving the valuation status, sort of valuation numbers associated more with a technology company.
And I agree with that. I guess I think of it in two ways. One is the way Rakesh described it, which is really the application of technology to solve a problem, generally with facilities or real estate. The other area I see it as really, I guess, kind of more core to our technology practice, which really is helping companies who are developing this technology. So that's kind of more of a pure tech play, licensing, IP issues, data issues, those types of things. So when I think of PropTech, I'm either thinking of representing a startup who's creating something new, or I'm thinking about representing a company who wants to use that new technology, and we're helping them figure out how to contract to use it.
Mark, is that consistent with what you're seeing across the pond?
Quite a big difference. So I think there are two bits of technology hitting a very old-fashioned world, and part of it is around what goes on in a building, and part of it's around the sort of desire to have connected cities and more intelligent forms of life, or existence, I suppose. And I think there's technology around the kind of infrastructure, so creating systems for sensors to talk to each other, so you can have kind of street lights with sensors on, and you can monitor what's going on across a network. And there's clearly technology there, and then there's technology in making a particular operation in a building more efficient, and that's using big data and analytics around processes in buildings, and you can make things more efficient through the use of big data and this kind of, I don't think operating system might not be quite the right word, but the whole sort of infrastructure for using space more efficiently. It's probably a bit philosophical, but That's what I think it is.
Yeah, and I know we're seeing our clients starting to implement PropTech. Rakesh, are you seeing the same thing? And if so, what types of issues are your clients facing when they're implementing PropTech?
Sure. So clients have, real estate portfolios, facilities all around the world. They could be manufacturing, warehouses, R&D centers, general office space, retail, what have you. And they're providing services in these portfolios, facility services that touch almost every employee, from the reception, parking, security, maintenance, audiovisual, food, coffee, etc. Now, historically, these services have been provided with a mixture of internal and some external suppliers. Today, this function is largely outsourced, largely, for most major corporations. And today what we see is a trend towards technology enablement of services that have been historically labor-enabled, so technology-enabled, and the use of technology. And so issues around whose technology systems do we use? How do we use the data on employees that are using our facilities? Today we have sensors, facial recognition technology. Employers know which parts of the building are being accessed by employees at what time. So there's a lot of personal information. And so the issues have to do with whose technology do we use? Do we make or buy? Who has access rights to the data? How do we protect that data? Those are the types of issues we're running into.
Can you give some examples? I know that when we were in Copenhagen, gave some examples of sensors that they deploy to better utilize the space that people are using. Can you maybe give some examples so people?
Sure. Well, as you point out, Kevin, I think real estate is probably the largest asset class out there today. It's over $1 trillion in total global value. And so corporations are highly incentivized to use the space efficiently and effectively. It drives productivity, but it's also a big cost on the balance sheet, big asset on. So they are trying to use information on how the buildings are being used and accessed to create efficiency. So we work, or not just we work, but even clients monitor where there's high utilization of space and low, and they reconfigure the space to meet how the building asset is being used. So we work will have a couch here today. Tomorrow it could be a ping pong table. There's the Deloitte building in Amsterdam, the Edge, where all the movement of employees are being tracked and they reconfigure the space based on employees that are using the space. So I think it raises a lot of fundamental questions on data and privacy.
Right. And so some examples that we were given with WeWork is they had a social room that was meant for networking and exchanging ideas. There were beer taps in the room that were next to each other. Through the use of cameras and other devices, they determined that when they left them next to each other, there wasn't as much interaction as there was when they put them across from each other. So by, capturing that data and analyzing it, they reconfigured the beer tap so they were across from each other. People actually spent more time pouring their beer, interacting with the person across from them. As Rakesh said, they also have sensors in their couches, so if the couches aren't being used, they get rid of them and put something else there, and they monitor that. If it's not being used, they get rid of it and put something else there. They're continually monitoring, but that may sound great if you're the one who's utilizing it on one hand, because you know that hopefully something will be there that you might want to use, but then on the other hand, the hairs in the back of your neck might go up because there are sensors capturing, whether it's cameras or other types of sensors, information about you as you're utilizing these assets, and that's an issue that we have to face. And I'm sure Mark has a lot to say about that. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fundamental balance, and I mean, I obviously come from a European perspective, but you can look at it, the data in three buckets, really. There is the truly anonymized data, which is the couch was being used for 3 hours during the day. There is the data which says, who was using the couch, which is identifies somebody. And then there might be somebody was using the couch because they are ill and they have to sit on a couch. Well, that is kind of sensitive personal data, and there's the levels at which you might feel comfortable about people using that data. But if you think about the facilities management type arrangement, you've got, a facilities management provider has getting this information, and if you're lucky, feeding it back to you. But I think, Marina, it might have been you that was talking about anonymized data and the deal between the supplier and the customer. But there, you have got a facility management provider who presumably has at least got the anonymized data about what's been going on in the building and how efficiently the building can be used. And that has a value which is just given away unless you try to capture it. And I read somewhere that the difference between you and me and a data scientist is that we don't really know how valuable anonymized data is, or any data is. A data scientist, on the other hand, would rather share his toothbrush than give you any of his personal data. So that just shows you how valuable it was. And you'll remember Mr. Zuckerberg was very reticent about telling the Senate what hotel he'd stayed in. And that was information that they know about everybody. They being Facebook. They might be other people as well. But the fact is that even if you're outside Europe, you have to think about, in Europe there are obviously more serious regulatory issues, but you just have to think about what is the right balance in terms of sharing the data. And if you are sharing the data, what basis you can share it on, because it has got some value.
Yeah. And Rakesh, because there are such different regulatory frameworks, if you look at personal data regulation in Europe versus the US, that of course translates differently into the PropTech solutions and PropTech applications that a particular client might implement. So are you finding that your clients are implementing these new pieces of technology on a facility-by-facility basis? Are they approaching it regionally? Are they trying to do things globally? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. I think companies today are outsourcing. They're not necessarily investing in technology in the real estate sector themselves. They are looking to suppliers who have already invested technology, and there's a heavy reliance on supplier systems. Now, how they're outsourcing varies. It does vary, and I would say it's dynamic. It's not static. It changes from first generation to second generation of the contract. So generation one, they may go with one supplier, globally use that supply system. Generation two, they discover that supplier is not good in APAC, but they're good in Europe and poor in the Americas. Then they'll switch. They'll put a different supplier in the Americas. Now they grapple with multiple systems. How can these systems work together to give a client uniform, sort of consistent data globally? So the issue they're running into is data consistency, the ability of supplier systems to share information as they move from more monolithic single supplier solutions to multiple supplier solutions. I think those are some of the issues we're running into. Mm-hmm. Now, on the technology side, they're questioning whether maybe they should own the technology, so it becomes a plug-and-play of suppliers, although it requires an investment, which is hard to justify when they could be using that shareholder money to put into a new product development, or whether one supplier could be a lead supplier whose technology all other suppliers use for delivery of services, or whether there's a third party like an Accenture or an IBM that could provide the technology that other suppliers plug into. But the industry has not settled on what's the best approach. It's in play. We have yet to see.
Yeah. And Kevin, from the contract perspective, we have a facilities management outsourcing form that many of you have probably used. And of course, we have robust IP protections there. Those provisions were not drafted with PropTech in mind. So do those provisions still work the same way for these new PropTech applications, or how do you see them changing?
Well, I think the real issue is not so much what we are doing in the facilities agreement. I think the issue is what what the client is doing in its other agreements, and to be mindful of the fact that this is now a multi-pronged sourcing strategy, and all of these deals need to work together. So we try to be as flexible as we can in, the main sourcing deals. So whether it's IT, F&A, FM, doesn't really matter. We have those core protections. But if you're going to go off and find a best of breed over here for this one piece and maybe a different deal over here for this piece, you may need rights. Maybe it's data rights to plug that back into your FM, or maybe you need license rights to allow your FM provider to access this piece of software that you're using over here. And if you didn't think about that when you negotiated this license agreement over here or data rights in this agreement over here, then you could have problems as you're trying to piece all this together. So I think, the outsourcing agreement itself, that doesn't really change, but it's all these other pieces that need to work together that thought needs to be put into to make sure that appropriate license or ownership rights are there and use rights as it relates to data so that you can use the data that you need.
Mm-hmm. Rakesh, can I ask a question? What do you think the future is for the way people pay for facilities management outsourcing? Because that's kind of changed, isn't it? If you're not having people providing the services, but you've got a technology or you've got an intelligent way of doing something, is that going to have some impact on the overall level of charges and how charges might be calculated?
That's an excellent question, Mark. I think costs and charges or fees in this sector have been not consistently defined.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing now, as you mentioned, since there's now an increased diffusion of technology and clients are seeking more and more technology innovation from suppliers, you will see in the charges proposed by the supplier a far higher cost for providing that technology. However, many times what's being proposed is very opaque. It's unclear what clients are paying for and what that includes. It's kind of a fixed charge for technology, and you may see, suppliers saying there's an app which costs $200,000. Our position is we have never seen an app that costs $200,000. We've seen an app that costs $199, $1.99, or $3.99. So, it's a new terrain, and I think clients will have to get used to how to deal with those technology charges and to better decipher what they're actually getting as functionality.
And so let me add that there are some fixed price facility management deals out there, but traditionally they are open book pass-through. So this having a black box, so to speak, for technology is just contrary to everything that we've seen in pricing in that market for years and years and years. And so, Rakesh has, worked in that industry for a really long time, keeping suppliers honest about what their charges are and what's profit, what's overhead, et cetera. And this is another area that is a challenge because it allows the suppliers to sneak profit into this little black box, and then of course cry that their margin, they say, is what, like 1.5 or 2%, which is.
Although we have nothing against them making their margin.
Correct.
The issue is how to make the margin.
Correct.
And what drives the right behaviors. I think that the issue is not that we want to reduce the margins in this sector. The only reason we strip out profits is so we can better tie or link clients' performance objectives with suppliers' margin motivation. And when that happens, you drive the right behavior. So, but if the margin is hidden in different places in the contract, then the supplier is motivated to do things and will have behaviors that are bewildering to the client. It will be delinked from their objective.
And this is giving them another opportunity to play those games. Yeah. So it's just something that we've been watching for. So,
but do you think the technology is going to become so important that new people are going to emerge? Like, I know Amazon has got its kind of unmanned supermarkets which use technology in some way to make sure you don't steal stuff from them. And and they're not a traditional supermarket. Is that sort of world going to happen in?
It's already happening. I mean, it is. So smart buildings, you have robots, you have artificial intelligence, you have augmented reality. In one way or another, these technologies are being used in the workplace today. We have clients where the gardener is a robot that mows the lawn. The mail person is a robot that delivers mail. I think you shared an article, Mark, today of a canine robot that deters crime.
Yeah, it wasn't successful.
It wasn't successful.
But it's very good. It was very good at stopping crime. It frightened people's real dogs. And
the neighbors didn't like it, so they attacked the robot. But it became a victim of crime, actually. However, so there are companies today that will be replacing the traditional workstation with, virtual reality headsets where your desktop can be as large or small as you want, and you can open multiple windows using a virtual. So the space use in the company. So this technology is already coming into the building. We have clients who, are using facial recognition technology to charge employees for their meals. There is no cash register. So this is already.
That won't be going on in Europe, though, will it?
Not anytime soon.
And Prakash, do your clients generally want to control that automation process, or are they deferring to the supplier to say, as long as you're delivering the savings to me and you can increase those savings through technology, I'm pretty open to the applications that you may want to introduce?
I think there was a time where a lot of decisions were perhaps being deferred to suppliers, but clients are asking the right questions today and are increasingly taking greater control of their technology strategy in terms of what should be deferred to suppliers. That might be a very tactical function. But where there's sensitive information and a more significant impact on the client itself, they're trying to control that more. They're also trying to reduce dependency on suppliers. They want to create some competitive tension as well, and they fear that if they become overly dependent on the supplier's technology, and they always worry about their data as well, that the supplier may have more leverage that then makes, the clients are comfortable with. So these are the issues they're grappling with. But I think the days of just deferring that the supplier will do best for us are numbered. I think many clients may get into an outsourcing situation thinking the supplier knows best. But they don't, today I don't think that's where they are.
Yeah, and lock-in situations seem like a big concern, both at termination when you're trying to leave that particular supplier, but even, Mark, I think you mentioned earlier, automating building security. I mean, if you're failing to pay fees, if you're late, can the supplier now lock you out of the building? It seems like those concerns are increased exponentially through the use of technology. Have you seen your clients address these issues in unique ways, or are they still using the traditional disengagement services model and relying on some of the other contractual levers to prevent those?
So I don't think we've seen anything new emerge. I mean, I think what might be a catalyst, both in the States and in Europe, is, as Oliver mentioned, the Network and Information Security Directive and equivalent legislation here, where there is going to be kind of an increased security obligation on operators of some businesses. So in Europe, very few businesses are actually going to be caught because they're providing essential services. And in the UK, at least, the UK government's position is we're not going to gold plate the directive, but it is a directive, and other European countries, or the remaining European countries, however you want to look at it, could decide to gold plate that and really extend the types of businesses which have got to have these rather more onerous security obligations. Because it may come as a bit of a shock to you, to me, to discover that the civil nuclear energy industry is not covered by this NIS directive. I'd have thought that would have been an obvious one. So, until it kind of settles down, there are clearly going to be really increased security obligations, which have got to be negotiated between the operator or service provider and the owner, and that I think is a space which is going to play out over the next few months and years. But no, I haven't seen anything specifically around the changes that technology brings.
Well, there's one. I think just want to add one example. I think it'll create stickiness. So technology, I think the supplier's motivation is to create stickiness between client and supplier, so they extend the contracts longer. But I think data transfer will be a big issue. And I'll give you a simple, practical example. We had a client who switched suppliers, right? And the disengagement provisions had in there that, the supplier must turn over data and this, that. And so the client got all these files. Now, when they tried to open the file, they couldn't because it required passwords. So they requested the password. Supplier didn't give it to them for 3 or 4 months. And they didn't know how to handle it. So now this is in a relatively simple technological environment. This is about a decade ago. But they felt stymied. Now the supplier would never say, I will not give you the passwords. The supplier would always write back, we are on it, or we will give you the password, we will get back to you. And our best minds are working on it right now. So they would send these letters to the client, and the client would actually never receive the password. And so, suppliers will do these kinds of things where they actually will not say no, they just won't do what's needed to be done, but they won't say I won't do it. And the clients patiently wait. So that was in a simple scenario, but in today's world, I think those disengagement provisions will become far more complex and vital in a more technology-enabled service environment.
And Kevin, I think that's the point that you were referring to earlier, where you've got to look at all of your agreements, your IT agreements, your licenses, your outsourcing agreements, because they're all starting to converge.
Right. So I was, talking about the legal, documenting this. I think the other side of this to be mindful of is the kind of more practical side, which is, you think about it like in our environment here at Mayor Brown, and I'm sure in probably all of your environments, when your PCs are deployed, typically there's an image that's been approved by the IT department. That image meets your security requirements, et cetera. There are standards that image is subject to, et cetera. So when you think about security and the IT infrastructure of your environment, that can be a real challenge here as we're looking at prop tech. So just looking at this building and the thermostat that's on the wall. So 10 years ago, thermostats were dumb terminals. They just were mechanical. It wasn't a problem. There was no security issue with it. Thermostats today, in many cases, are now connected to networks and are now points of entry. Their access point. So if you think about securing your network and where people can, get in, that now is a point of entry for someone to get in. And there are thermostats in places within this building that are not secure or not places where you need a badge to get to. So those types of things need to be thought through and considered. And it was a few years ago that I was having a conversation with a security person who was walking me through a major security breach that had occurred through a thermostat and had made their way all the way through to the main network that they were trying to get to. So it can be done. So again, it's just the fact that you have to be mindful of how we talked about the connected world before. This stuff ultimately is all connected, and those issues need to be thought through carefully. There's data, there's security, there's IP. There's lots of things we need to think about, both from a contractual standpoint, but also from a practical.
I think the example that I'm familiar with, Kevin, on that point is the department's so-called Target. I call it Target, but it's actually Target. The hackers accessed, millions, I think maybe 100 million customers' data through the building automation system. So a maintenance contractor was working on the building automation system. Their laptop didn't have the security, certification and protections. And the hackers found entry, as Kevin was saying, into the main folder, the corporate folder, through the building automation set, because, everything was connected, and that's where they stole data, customer data. In that case, the CEO was terminated by the board, as well as the CTO, Chief Technology Officer. So there's a simple example. Building automation system was the access point.
And so these systems serve as new vulnerability points in an otherwise secure environment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is probably a good point to ask if there are any questions. Anybody have any questions out there? No?
Okay. So maybe we can do closing remarks before we let folks go to the break. Let's give Rakesh a break since he led us off with a PropTech definition. Maybe we'll start with Mark for closing remarks. So Mark, in summary, what are just a couple of tips that maybe you could give our audience when they're dealing perhaps with their clients and these new ideas where the business clients may be trying to implement technology as related?
So I think the two things to think about are data and security. In terms of data, there are two aspects to it. One is make sure you are not giving away value to the supplier who is getting hold of aggregated or anonymized data for nothing. Remember Mr. Zuckerberg. And then if you are sharing data, and building management is incredibly complicated, lots of people get lots of data, make sure that you share, your arrangements for sharing the data are clear and compliant with personal data regulation around the world, and there's been a lot of that stuff today. And that's point 1A and 1B, and point 2 would be mindful of the increased security risk and the increased regulatory burden that changing security requirements impose on people doing things which might seem quite basic, but they're not basic anymore.
So I would just add to that as technology is being used, for efficiency purposes in facilities or real estate, that technology should be vetted by your IS groups just as it vets any other software or hardware that you're going to deploy. I would not look at this as, this is different. This is just, some efficiency tool. It's like a piece of equipment as opposed to, technology. I wouldn't do that. I think the examples we gave are too important. The risks are too high, and it's just not worth it. If you do have a breach, there could be, significant consequences. So I would take the use of any technology very seriously and run it through your processes, just if you were going to license software and have your IS group look at it and make sure it's okay. So that's number one. The other thing I would just stress is, again, as companies are moving to a multi-sourcing model to make sure that you have the rights to data, software, hardware, whatever it is you need that you're doing in other areas, make sure that works with what you're doing in the facility space, that you have the rights that you need so that everything works together. Otherwise, you're going to be in breach of something, whether that's your main facilities agreement or you're in breach of your other contracts where you've out-tasked. They need to work together or you're going to be in breach somewhere.
Okay.
Last but not the least, following my two august panelists, I would say in this space, this is a less mature space than, say, IT, facilities management, real estate, IT or HR or finance and accounting. So the rules of the game on how technology will be treated, data and other things, have not been fully defined. It's a bit of an open playing field, which means there are opportunities, but as well as exposure. So I think those have to be handled very, very carefully with the right subject matter expertise.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. And if anyone has questions, last call. If not, you can always find them during the break or later.
Thank you.
Okay.